Guys, today I will rank every element in Genshin Impact from worst to best based on how good they are in the meta right now. This is strictly about the elements, so I try to avoid talking about how good each character is for their own element, although it will be hard to separate the two things sometimes, but that's life. I will also give my own thoughts on how OUers can improve the elements, so when they eventually, hypothetically, watch this video, they can find inspiration to improve their game. But hopefully they won't watch my beta content videos. So first up, the worst element in Genshin Impact. You guessed it, it's physical. Physical is very unique in the scope of Genshin Impact because it's the only element to not have an icon. Other than being just a fun fact, it also properly depicts the state of physical in Genshin because it's reflected in the actual gameplay. Physical damage is something that every character that doesn't use Catalyst as a weapon has access to through auto attacks. However, since it's not an element like the others, it lacks its own elemental reactions. As it stands, the only elemental reaction that affects physical is Superconduct, a subsection of Cryo and Electro. There is also Shatter, but we don't talk about that. This reaction lowers the opponent's resistance to physical by 40%, which is something most other elements get on their teams through an artifact set. So, to begin with, physical is already at a huge disadvantage because its own defining factor is something everybody else gets for free. It doesn't end here because it has issues in terms of team building as well. Physical teams like to have a variety of elements in their team since by default they have no particular restrictions. You have to bring a Cryo and Electro units to apply Superconduct, but since this elemental reaction is pretty easy to maintain, you can fill the rest of the team in many different ways. This means you have space to add some very strong sub-DPS and supports like Furina and Yelan. At a glance this seems great, but there is a flaw here. The only character that sees his potential maximized here is the physical one. For starters, since Superconduct is only affecting physical damage, the Cryo or Electro character that is only there to deal elemental damage is getting the short end of the stick. Secondarily, physical damage dealers have no use on their teams for anemo supports like Kazuha for example, that would massively buff the elemental sub-DPS on the team. As a result, the structure of this team is extremely geared towards making the physical carry shine, so this carry needs to be very strong to make it work. Unfortunately, saying that's not the case at the moment would be a massive understatement. The only 5-star carry we have in the game that is meant for physical damage is Eula, a character that is mostly outdated and also has a million flaws she didn't really deserve. The latest addition to the physical disaster class is Premine, who for what he is actually pretty solid, but since he's a 4-star, they likely penalized him in terms of balancing. So in order to fix the situation, unless they want to completely overhaul the element, they have to make a physical DPS that is much stronger than other carries in the game as a baseline. This may sound kinda obvious, like no shit, just make the character stronger, but honestly, it's the only way I see to fix the situation that doesn't include changing the element completely. And also an Electro Cryo character that can deal physical damage as a sub-DPS would help because it will make the synergy with Superconduct better. The second worst element is Geo. Again, no surprises here. Now, honestly, I believe I'm kinda more positive on Geo than other people are. Yes, in this list I'm only putting it above something that is barely an element, but I kinda like Geo. It gets bad rep all the time because it's honestly awful in terms of elemental reactions, somehow even worse than physical, but that's the point. Like, it's a very neutral element. Like, the whole thing with Geo in Crystallites is that Geo attacks won't disrupt other auras on opponents that much. Practically, this means that if, for example, you're building a Vape team with a Hydro sub-DPS and a Pyro main carry, if you bring a Geo support, you won't disrupt that elemental reaction. This is what allowed a character like Zhongli to become universal in the meta, a universal shielder. Case in point, if you bring Toma on your Hu Tao Vape team, he will likely fuck up some elemental reactions for Hu Tao, while Zhongli won't, and that's because Geo is neutral. Now, the downside of that is mostly in terms of damage. Geo sub DPS are not that great outside of mono Geo teams when taken singularly. Characters like Albedo and Shiori get basically no support by being used on a double Hydro Hutao team, for example. They will need you to bring a second Geo unit on the team to activate the Geo Resonance and other positive effects. The Geo Resonance in particular is very strong, it's probably the strongest resonance in the game in terms of how much they get, so by missing that out, you're losing a lot of damage on your Geo characters. But the problem is that if you bring 2 Geo units on the team, you're kinda making Geo the core of the team, and compared to other options, it's mostly worse. This works better when you have a Geo character as the main carry, so Geo damage becomes the whole point of the team. The latest experiment they did with that is Navia, and she's pretty good, a step in the right direction. So overall, not bad. But if I had to improve one thing about Geo is its artifact set choices, specifically the support choices. Currently, in that sense, the only artifact they have is the Petra set. Originally, this was meant to be the equivalent to the Veridistant Veneer set the Anemo characters had access to, but the difference with that is that the Veridistant Veneer is very easy to use and also very strong, while the Petra set is just extremely annoying at times. The issue is the elemental reaction it's tied to, Crystallites, that is just worse and worse as a baseline. When you apply Geo on an opponent that has Pyro, Cryo, Hydro or Electro applied on him, a shard of that specific element will be created near his position. That is Crystallites, and if you physically move on top of the shard, you will get a shield of that element. Now, if a character that has the Petra set picks that shard up, it will also grant the whole team a damage bonus to that element of 35%. The buff itself is great, but the issue is that it only works for one element at a time. This means, for example, that if you pick 2 shards of 2 differing elements, the only buff you will get is for the element that you picked last. In general, getting the right elemental shard can be quite hard, if not impossible, because most teams include multiple damaging elements. It works better on mono teams, so teams where the damage is only coming from one element, for example, New Millet teams, Lineage teams. In those situations, the Petra set is actually quite good, and it makes a character like Zhongli even stronger. But still, I would like Geo to get a more flexible option, just to make Geo off-field characters a stronger presence on teams. Let me remind you that if you enjoy my channel but you haven't subbed yet, please consider doing so because it really helps me notice your support. Next we have Cryo. Cryo is honestly not amazing right now. It has access to 2 elemental reactions mainly. One is Freeze, that basically just stun locks opponents in a single place by freezing them. Something that was kind of a cheat code in the past, but now it's kinda fallen off, because it doesn't work on bosses, and bosses are basically everywhere in the Abyss right now. The second reaction is Melt, that is basically the Vaporize equivalent for Cryo characters, and honestly, it's pretty good. In order to work, it requires you to apply Pyro on opponents consistently, but by using Bennett and Shelling as a core, that's not a problem. Most recently, Brisley has seen a lot of success in it, partially because it's pretty easy to use, it's an auto attack spam character, so the team pretty much goes on auto mode. Specifically, the best team you can make for this is Fiorina, Bennett, Shelling, and a Cryo character, and this is honestly a very strong building base for the future. So Melt is pretty good, while I can expect Freeze to get the short end of the stick more and more, because while when it works, it feels very strong, when it doesn't, it feels awful. The thing I will change about Cryo teams is the Cryo Resonance, because it's just not good for Melt teams. It buffs characters' crit rate when you hit opponents that are affected by Cryo or Frozen, but clearly on Melt teams this never happens because they'll have Pyro applied on them, hopefully. So I will change it to something more flexible, just to make it better for Melt. This video has been sponsored by Honkai Star Rail. If you know about Genshin, there is no way you don't know about this game. I'm currently playing it and having a blast. It's a turn-based RPG made by Hoyoverse, and it just hit its first anniversary, so that means many new cool characters, new story updates, and juicy rewards. Just like in Genshin, in this game you'll see many different environments, each of them with its own unique cultural references. references. The latest region that got introduced to the game is Penacony, the City of Dreams, and I assure you this name is very literal. The culture of this city is based on pure entertainment, so walking through the streets of this wonderful place literally feels like a dream come true. Of course, it's impossible not to mention who the new characters are, specifically Acheron, the one that is currently on banner. She's the new OP DPS, and of course I pulled for her. She has a very cool yet mysterious design, and most importantly she feels amazing to play. In the second part of this patch, they will release Aventurine, an extravagant looking gambler. He's a defensive minded unit, and in this game you really need good defensive units to stay alive, so there is probably no better moment to start than with this banner. They're currently giving out 20 pulls for free, and that will surely make it easier for you to pull the new characters. So definitely make sure to check this game out. And also remember to check the link in the description below to get 50 free jades. Next up is kind of a joint placement because I'm a coward and I couldn't choose. The first is Electro. To me, Electro is in a great place right now, even though it owes Dendro lunch money every day for that. Quicken and Hyperbloom are definitely the main reasons for Electro's success today. Hyperbloom is basically the premier free-to-play reaction, a reaction that is so strong that you can build the entire team around it and make them good. Quicken is an amplifying reaction, just like Melt and Vaporites are, because it amplifies your raw damage. It's a status that is applied on opponents whenever you apply both Dendro and Electro on them, and it lasts for 8 seconds. During those 8 seconds, any Electro or Dendro application will cause a damage amplification for the attack that generated the application. It's a very flexible reaction because unlike Melt or Vaporites, there is no order needed in terms of application. You just apply Electro and Dendro whenever and you get free damage. The non-Dendro reactions are kinda meh, mainly Overload and Electrocharge. Overload is so marginal in today's meta that to justify its existence they needed to make a character that needs the Overload reaction to activate her hit. The kicker is that the Overload itself is still doing nothing in terms of damage because Chevreuse doesn't buff that. So clearly, their plan for bad reactions is to make characters that need them to function. This has been the case for Shatter, for Bloom, for Overload, and expect Electrocharge to follow suit as well. So, in order to improve Electro, I don't know. The element is honestly in a good place after Dendro. So I think the one thing they could do to make it better is just to release units that can unleash its potential more. For example, I think we still kinda need a better Quicken Electro carry. Right now we have Keqing, that is a standard 5-star, and Yae, that is a sub DPS that can function as a carry, but they can definitely do better than that. I think this could have big potential because the official Kazuha Dendro core is very strong for Quicken, and an Electro carry that is on the level of Alhaitham, for example, could really push the core to upper heights. Next up, Pyro. Predictably, another damage-oriented element. Pyro honestly declined a bit compared to the past, but it's still very good in terms of meta. In terms of reactions, mostly thanks to Vaporites, the OG damage reactions, the way to go for Diluc teams, Hootout teams, international teams, and nowadays it's still very good for Diluc teams, Hootout teams, international teams, but also jamming teams, Yoimiya teams, the upcoming Arlecchino teams. It's just a very good reaction. It also has access to meth reactions thanks to Cryo, but since Cryo off-field characters are not that good in terms of application outside of Kaeya Constellation 6, it's kinda niche. It's mostly an option for Pyro damage dealers that have low frequency in terms of attacks, like for example jamming. Then for the rest, the Dendro reactions, Burgeon and Burning. Burgeon is basically Hyperbloom's little brother, like it almost has everything Hyperbloom has, but it can't quite get there. The biggest flaw Burgeon has is that it can't be mixed with Quicken like Hyperbloom can. The fact that team has access to Quicken makes characters like Sign and Alhaitham deal a lot of raw damage even in a context that doesn't exactly favor that. Burgeon doesn't have something like this, so it's considerably more limited in terms of options, but overall it's still pretty good, like it's a good option. On the other hand, Burning is not so great, and probably what I would improve about Pyro. It definitely definitely has potential in terms of damage, but so far it's only being used for supportive means. This is because burning maintains pretty good pyro aura on opponents, so it's used as setup for melt and vape reactions. However, it also deals damage to opponents as long as it stays active, and in AoE it can be pretty good damage considering it spreads pretty easily. Playing a burning team with Kazuha as the pyro propagator is honestly pretty fun, because then the AoE becomes even better and Kazuha becomes the main trigger of the application, which is great since he has a lot of elemental mastery by default. On the flip side, in single target situations, this reaction is just not good enough to be the main source of damage for the team. Also, it deals damage to your characters as well if you stay close to opponents, so it's pretty dangerous too. So all we need is a burning dedicated carry that fixes all of the flaws, simple as that. They're already releasing a burning artifact set, so I feel like we're getting pretty close to that. Third, I'm putting Anemo. In terms of structure, Anemo is definitely a supportive element. It has a DPS side with Wanderer and Shao, but it's almost single-handedly held together by Farazan. The core traits of Anemo are grouping, Swirl, and the Verdistant Veneer set, so that's what I'm going to analyze here. Having said that, Anemo kind of lost its grouping identity, it's mostly a Kazuha thing now. Originally we had Venti, Sucrose, Main Traveler, Jean all having grouping utility, but now they all aged kinda badly in terms of that. Venti specifically. Venti was considered broken at release just because he could group opponents so easily with his burst, but now that's not possible anymore more than half of the time since it only works with very specific opponents. In particular, only against light opponents, which nowadays are a very small part of the cake. Kazuha is the only one that is great at that now because his pull is stronger than Venti's, so he can group heavier opponents than him. But still, they're clearly trying to limit that because, for example, Xianyun doesn't even have grouping, so I'm starting to wonder if that's even an Anemo thing anymore. The Verdistant Veneer artifact set is the one reason Anemo deserves its spot, since it single-handedly makes it the backbone for many elemental teams. Its power lies in its simplicity. You use an Anemo attack on a character that has a swirlable element applied on him, and bang, you get a massive damage increase for free. However, it can also be pretty technical with double swirls, Goba swirls, Bennett's words, whatever, so the potential and the versatility of the set just increased over time. Its only flaw is that it doesn't apply to off-field swirls, so you have to swap on-field with the Anemo character to swirl, which makes it kinda situational in multi-wave scenarios. Lastly is words and infusion, the way Anemo deals damage. Funnily enough, I think this is both the most underestimated part about Anemo and the one thing Hoyoverse could improve in the future. Characters like Sucrose and Kazuha can do a lot of damage through words and infusions. Not in a single instance maybe, because in that sense they're not the strongest hits, but cumulatively they're very good. Both of these allow them to deal damage by using other elements, which is great because with those elements they can also trigger other reactions, something that scales very well with the high elemental mastery they have. The one thing that it's still missing is an Anemo damage dealer fully dedicated to sword damage. Not Sucrose. Sucrose is a fake. I mean a character that is fully meant for that, kit-wise. That's what I hoped Wanderer to be initially, but unfortunately they made him a kinda boring hyper carry in my opinion. So, Hoyoverse, you do it, and I promise you right here that I will spend a couple $100 on that. Second best, Dendro. Already talked about Dendro reactions so much in this video, so I will just tell you why I'm putting it above Anemo specifically. As I said before, Anemo is a very strong supportive option for a lot of elemental teams, but it's not completely irreplaceable. It's replaceable by things that buff those teams at a similar level. Meanwhile, that's not the case for Dendro, because obviously Dendro teams fully rely on Dendro application. Dendro really built its own ecosystem in Genshin Impact, and it has very solid foundations. It can essentially be summarized with Quicken, Bloom and Burning, but there is such a big variety of teams you can make starting from these core ideas, and it's all possible because of the Dendro application. And the first place goes to Hydro. Remember to check Star Rail in the links below, and bye bye.